The ballroom of the Carlton Hotel in New York shimmered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over round tables draped in white linen. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork, balancing trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. At the head table sat Richard Langford, a tall white man in his early 50s, slicked back silver hair gleaming under the lights. Richard wasn't just any guest. He was the billionaire CEO of Langford Industries, a corporation that prided itself on controlling half the nation's tech supply chain. Tonight was more than a charity gala. It was a carefully orchestrated event where Richard planned to seal a multi-billion-dollar deal with Horizon Global, a European conglomerate looking for an American partner. The whispers in the room were clear. If Richard landed the deal, his company's stock would skyrocket overnight. But beneath his polished smile and tailored tuxedo, Richard carried an arrogance that filled every corner of the ballroom. To him, the waiters weren't people. They were props. And it was only a matter of time before his arrogance revealed itself. Among the staff, weaving through the glittering tables, was Marcus Johnson, a young black man in his mid-20s. His uniform was spotless, his posture straight, but his eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion. Marcus wasn't just serving champagne that night. He was working his third double shift that week, desperate to pay tuition for his younger sister, who dreamed of becoming a nurse. Marcus had learned long ago how to blend into the background in rooms like this. He knew how to nod politely when wealthy guests looked past him, how to keep his head down when snide comments floated his way. But what Marcus couldn't control was the color of his skin. And in a room filled with privilege, it was the one thing that made him stand out. Richard waved his hand impatiently as Marcus approached with a tray of champagne. "Finally," Richard muttered under his breath, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Marcus offered the tray with steady hands, but Richard sneered, plucking a glass from it. "You're slower than my driver in rush hour," Richard said, chuckling at his own joke. The men at his table laughed along, not because it was funny, but because Richard Langford was laughing. Marcus swallowed hard, keeping his expression neutral. He turned to leave, but Richard wasn't finished. "Hey, you," he called out, his voice cutting across the music and chatter. "Yes, you, the waiter." Marcus froze, turning back politely. Richard leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips. "What's your name?" "Marcus, sir." Richard chuckled again, shaking his head. "Marcus, huh? Let me guess, you're in college? Studying something soft like art history? Or maybe you're just working tables because that's all you're good for." The laughter around the table grew louder. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he didn't flinch. He had been here before. This was just another night, or so he thought. As Marcus stepped forward to refill Richard's glass, the CEO leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide it. "Don't spill it, stupid." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Conversations faltered at nearby tables. A woman gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. Marcus's face burned, but he kept his composure. Setting the bottle down without a tremor, he walked away with his head high, but the humiliation pressed down on him like a weight. He could feel eyes on his back, whispers chasing him across the room. He thought it would end there. Another cruel comment, another silent wound. But the ripple of that single insult was only beginning. At the far side of the ballroom sat Elena Marquez, a Latina woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for integrity. Elena wasn't just another guest. She was the CEO of Horizon Global, the very company Richard was trying to woo. Elena had been watching the exchange closely. She saw Marcus's quiet dignity. She heard Richard's careless cruelty. And in that moment, she made a decision. Business, she believed, wasn't just about numbers. It was about values. And Richard Langford had just exposed his. The gala carried on, but the atmosphere shifted. Some guests looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. Others murmured uncomfortably, stealing glances at Marcus as he continued working with calm professionalism. Richard, oblivious to the storm he had stirred, bragged to his table about private jets and offshore accounts. To him, the insult was already forgotten. But to everyone else, it lingered in the air, souring the glittering night. And for Marcus, it was a reminder of every time he had been underestimated, dismissed, or ridiculed because of his skin. He didn't know was that his dignity in that moment was about to change the course of the night and Richard's entire empire. The night wore on, and the ballroom seemed alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and deals whispered behind manicured hands. But at Richard Langford's table, the air was heavier, tainted by the CEO's unchecked arrogance. He spoke louder now, his ego ballooning with every story he told. Do you know what separates me from every other CEO in this city? Richard boasted to a group of investors, his chest puffed like a peacock. I don't waste time on feelings. I don't coddle weak employees. That's why Langford Industries runs like a machine. No excuses, no failures. He raised his glass, smirking, but his words didn't land as smoothly as he thought. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, remembering how he'd humiliated Marcus earlier. The room wasn't laughing quite as hard anymore, though Richard was too blinded by his own pride to notice. At the corner of the room, Marcus worked silently, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. He avoided Richard's table, though his ears caught every arrogant word. Each insult Richard tossed into the air felt like salt rubbed deeper into his wound. He raised his glass, smirking, but his words didn't land as smoothly as he thought. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, remembering how he'd humiliated Marcus earlier. The room wasn't laughing quite as hard anymore, though Richard was too blinded by his own pride to notice. At the corner of the room, Marcus worked silently, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. He avoided Richard's table, though his ears caught every arrogant word. Each insult Richard tossed into the air felt like salt rubbed deeper into his wound. But Richard wasn't done. As dessert was being served, Marcus approached the table again, balancing a tray of delicate chocolate soufflés. He placed them carefully in front of each guest, his movements steady. When he reached Richard, the CEO leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Marcus as if daring him to make a mistake. Marcus set the soufflé down without a single tremor. Richard smirked, then muttered loudly enough for the table to hear. I don't know why they hire people like him. Probably just ticking some diversity box. The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. One guest at the table shifted uncomfortably. Another coughed into his napkin, trying to mask the awkward silence. But Richard was already chuckling at his own joke. Marcus's jaw tightened. His heart pounded in his chest. But he forced himself to keep moving, placing the last dessert and walking away without a word. Inside, though, the wound cut deep. He had worked his whole life to prove himself. And still, men like Richard saw nothing but the color of his skin. The insult didn't go unnoticed. In the age of smartphones, Nothing did. A young woman at a nearby table had discreetly recorded the exchange on her phone. By the time Marcus disappeared into the service corridor, the clip was already making its rounds across the ballroom, whispered about in corners, shared under linen-covered tables. Did you hear what Richard said? He called the waiter a diversity hire. Unbelievable. The whispers spread like wildfire. Some guests shifted their loyalty in silence, realizing they were watching not just a dinner, but a potential downfall. Richard thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. In the staff corridor, Marcus leaned against the wall, tray pressed to his chest. His hands trembled now that he was out of sight. He had faced racism before, but tonight, in front of hundreds of powerful people, it stung sharper. Part of him wanted to walk out, throw the uniform on the floor and never come back. But another part, the stronger part, refused. He wouldn't give Richard the satisfaction of breaking him. He straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and went back out into the ballroom. His dignity, though bruised, remained unshaken. Later that evening, Elena excused herself from her table and walked slowly toward the service area. Her assistant pointed discreetly toward Marcus, who was arranging glasses near the bar. Elena Marquez, she introduced herself softly. Marcus blinked, startled. He knew who she was. Everyone did. I saw what happened earlier, Elena said, her tone low but firm. You handled yourself with grace. Marcus swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Elena smiled faintly, placing a hand on his arm. People reveal their true worth in how they treat others. Tonight, Richard revealed his, and you revealed yours. With that, she slipped a business card into his pocket and returned to her table before Marcus could even find words. When the time came for Richard to present his pitch to Horizon Global's board members, he stood tall at the podium, slides glowing behind him, confidence oozing from every pore. He talked about profit margins, supply chains, and market dominance, his voice booming across the ballroom. But Elena sat with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. She wasn't seeing numbers anymore. She was seeing Marcus's face, the dignity he held, the humiliation Richard had inflicted. When Richard concluded, expecting applause, Elena simply leaned into her microphone and said, "Thank you, Mr. Langford. Horizon Global has heard enough tonight to make our decision." The room went quiet. Richard smiled smugly, convinced he had sealed the deal. Then Elena added, "And based on what we've witnessed this evening, we will not be moving forward with Langford Industries." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Richard's smile vanished, his face paling. Richard stumbled, trying to recover. What? This is absurd. You can't. This is a multi-billion-dollar deal." Elena met his gaze, calm and steady. "We don't just invest in businesses, Mr. Langford. We invest in leaders. And tonight, you showed us exactly what kind of leader you are." The whispers turned into a roar. Investors pulled out their phones, news of Horizon's rejection spreading in real time. Cameras flashed, capturing Richard's stunned expression. At the edge of the room, Marcus watched silently, a mix of shock and quiet satisfaction swelling in his chest. For once, justice was unfolding not behind closed doors, but in the open, where everyone could see. Within minutes, Richard's phone buzzed with frantic messages. Stockholders demanded explanations. Journalists hounded his PR team. The arrogance that had carried him for decades was collapsing under the weight of his own words. But for Marcus, the moment was more than corporate drama. It was proof that dignity mattered, that staying true to himself in the face of cruelty had not gone unnoticed. The night wasn't over yet, but one thing was certain. Richard Langford's empire would never be the same again. The next morning, newspapers across the city blazed with the same headline: Billionaire CEO humiliates black waiter, loses $3.5 billion deal overnight. Richard Langford's face was plastered everywhere, his arrogance frozen in the photographs snapped at the gala. The viral clip of him calling Marcus a diversity hire had spread like wildfire online, racking up millions of views. Comment sections burned with outrage. Disgusting. Fire him. This is 2025. How is this still happening? Langford industry stock plummeted before the markets even opened. For the first time in his career, Richard wasn't in control. He was the scandal. Inside Langford Tower, the atmosphere was suffocating. Board members sat around a long glass table, their faces grim as Richard stormed in. "This is a witch hunt," Richard barked, slamming his briefcase down. "One stupid clip, and suddenly I'm the villain? I built this company. They can't do this to me." But his tirade fell flat. The chairman cleared his throat. "Richard, you embarrassed the company. Our investors are pulling out. Employees are resigning. You've become a liability." Richard's chest tightened. "You can't fire me." The chairman's gaze was cold. "Watch us." For the first time, Richard realized he was alone. The power he had lorded over others for decades was slipping through his fingers like sand. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his modest apartment, exhausted, but still replaying the events in his head. The humiliation stung, but what lingered more was Elena's kindness, the way she had seen him, truly seen him. As he set his keys down, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. "Marcus," a calm voice said. "This is Elena Marquez." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. Elena Marquez didn't just call people. "I want you to come work for Horizon Global," she continued. "We need people with dignity and strength. People like you, not because of what happened last night, but because you showed the kind of character I want leading our teams." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes. For years, he'd been told he was just a waiter. Now, someone finally saw his worth. While Marcus's life took a turn upward, Richard spiraled downward. His mansion, once buzzing with parties, stood eerily quiet. His phone, once ringing with opportunities, now rang with demands, angry shareholders, lawsuits, canceled deals. He poured himself a drink at noon, staring at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time, he saw not the untouchable billionaire, but a bitter old man who had built an empire on arrogance and cruelty. Still, Richard clung to denial. "They'll come back," he muttered. "They need me. They all need me." But deep down, he knew the truth. No one needed him anymore. A week later, Richard was summoned to a public shareholder meeting. Cameras flashed as he stepped onto the stage, sweat glistening on his brow. The hall was packed, every eye on him. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the boos drowned him out. Investors shouted. Activists held signs demanding accountability. And in the front row sat Marcus, invited as an honored guest by Elena herself. Richard's gaze locked on him, and for a moment he saw not a waiter, but the man whose dignity had destroyed his empire. His voice cracked as he tried to speak. This isn't fair." But no one listened. The world had already judged him. After the meeting, Marcus stood with Elena outside the hall. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You see, Marcus," she said softly, "men like Richard believe power is in money, but true power, it's in integrity. You showed the world that." Marcus smiled faintly, still overwhelmed. "I was just doing my job." Elena shook her head. "No, you were showing the world how to rise above hate." She handed him a folder. Inside was his new contract with Horizon Global. His future, brighter than he had ever imagined. Months later, Marcus walked through Horizon's headquarters, no longer in a waiter's uniform, but in a tailored suit. Colleagues greeted him with respect, not because of his position, but because of the strength he carried with him. As he passed a conference room, he caught his reflection in the glass. For the first time, he didn't see a man defined by what others thought. He saw a leader. Meanwhile, Richard Langford's name faded from the headlines. A cautionary tale of arrogance, racism, and downfall. His empire crumbled, but Marcus's story rose from its ashes. This story reminds us that racism, arrogance, and cruelty can destroy even the mightiest empires. Richard thought he was untouchable, but in the end, his own actions brought him down. And Marcus? He proved that dignity and integrity are stronger than hate. No matter how small someone is made to feel, justice has a way of finding its voice. Remember this. Treat others with respect, because one day, the person you look down on might be the one standing above you.